"You're not welcome at the funeral, Rebecca." My father's voice came through the phone, cold and final. "Your grandmother wouldn't have wanted you there after what you did." I stood frozen in my tiny apartment kitchen, the morning sunlight that usually felt so cheerful now seeming to mock me as my world collapsed for the second time in a week. First losing Grandma Maggie, the one person who had always believed in me, and now being told I couldn't even say goodbye. What my father didn't know was that the weathered leather journal I'd found hidden in Grandma's antique writing desk 3 days earlier would not only expose decades of family secrets, but would change all our lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ceramic mug I'd been clutching slipped from my hand and shattered against the linoleum floor, hot coffee splashing across my bare feet. I barely noticed the burn. My grandmother, Margaret Everett, Maggie to everyone who loved her, had been my anchor, my confidante, and my biggest supporter throughout my 28 years of life. Even during the 3 years of family estrangement that had torn our once close family apart, she had remained my secret ally, meeting me for coffee every month at the Roasted Bean on the edge of town where my parents never went. "Dad, please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Whatever you think of me, this isn't about us. It's about Grandma. I need to say goodbye." "You made your choice 3 years ago," he replied, his voice carrying that edge of finality I'd known since childhood. "When you chose your lifestyle on over your family's values, when you embarrassed us at the company gala, when you rejected everything we stand for." My lifestyle, as he put it, was pursuing my passion as an art therapist instead of joining the family business. The embarrassment was publicly disagreeing with my father's dismissive comments about my profession at his company's annual gala. And the values I'd rejected were the superficial appearances and social climbing that had consumed my parents since they moved us to Mountain View Estates when I was 15. "Tom, who are you talking to?" I heard my stepmother Vanessa's voice in the background, her artificially sweetened tone a perfect match for her artificially enhanced everything else. "Nobody important," my father answered, not bothering to cover the phone. Rebecca was just leaving. The call ended before I could respond. I stood in my silent kitchen, coffee soaking into my socks, the morning sun illuminating the modest apartment I'd made my home after being effectively cut off financially 3 years ago. The walls were covered with artwork created by the at-risk teens I worked with at the Cedar Grove Community Center. My diploma from the art therapy program I'd fought so hard to complete hung proudly beside them. This small space represented everything I'd built on my own, without my family's money or approval. I sank to the floor, carefully avoiding the ceramic, shards, and pulled out my phone to call the one person who would understand. Zach answered on the second ring. "Hey, Becca, what's up?" His familiar voice already bringing a measure of comfort. "She's gone, Zach. Grandma Maggie died yesterday." The words felt unreal as they left my mouth. "And my father just informed me I'm not welcome at the funeral." Zach's sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know about what he thought of my father's decree. We'd been best friends since middle school, long before my family's wealth had separated me from most of my peers. He'd stood by me through my parents' ugly divorce when I was 12, my father's swift remarriage to Vanessa 6 months later, and the gradual transformation of our family from normal to status-obsessed following my father's unexpected success in the tech industry. That's beyond cruel, Beck, even for him. Zach paused. "Do you want me to come over?" "No," I said, surprising myself with my own resolve. "Actually, I need to go to Grandma's house. The funeral isn't until Saturday, which gives me 3 days. There's something I need to find." "What are you talking about?" Zach's confusion was warranted. I hadn't told anyone about my discovery earlier that week. I visited Grandma on Monday, like I did every week. She seemed different. more tired than usual, but also like she had something important to tell me. My voice caught as I remembered her frail hand patting mine across her antique mahogany dining table. She asked me to look in her writing desk for a letter she'd written me, but before she could tell me more, Vanessa showed up unexpectedly. Grandma clammed up immediately, told me to leave through the back garden gate so Vanessa wouldn't see me. "Wait, so you were the last person to see her?" Zach asked. "I think so, at least the last family member." The realization hit me hard. Zach, what if she knew? What if she knew she was dying and wanted to tell me something important? "And you think it's in her writing desk? The letter?" "I don't know about the letter. I went back the next day, used my key when no one answered, but before I could really search properly, I found this old journal hidden in a false bottom drawer. It was full of entries going back decades, but before I could read much, I heard someone at the front door and had to leave quickly. I only got through a few pages." What I didn't tell Zach was how those few pages had already hinted at family secrets I'd never imagined. References to the agreement and the price of silence that made little sense without context, but had kept me awake that night, wondering what my proper, respectable grandmother had been hiding all these years. "So, you want to go back and get the journal before your dad or Vanessa finds it?" Zach pieced it together quickly. "Exactly. And find the letter she wanted me to have. When do we leave?" That was Zach. No questions, no judgment, just unwavering support. It was why, despite my family's best efforts to separate us when they moved us to the right neighborhood with the right kind of people, I had fought to keep him in my life. "Give me an hour to clean up and pull myself together. I'll pix you up." Cedar Grove was a mid-sized town divided by more than just geography. The historic district where my grandmother's Victorian home stood was old money and old stories. Families who had built the logging and fishing industries that had once been the town's lifeblood. Mountain View Estates, where my parents now lived, was new money and relentless social competition. Tech executives and business owners who had moved in during the economic boom 15 years ago and transformed parts of Cedar Grove from a blue-collar town to a status symbol. My grandmother had never approved of my father's migration to Mountain View, even though her own considerable wealth would have allowed her the same move decades earlier. "There's history in these walls," she would tell me during our weekend, baking sessions when I was young. "And history has value, Rebecca. Never forget that." I picked up Zach from his apartment near the community center where we both worked. He as a counselor, me as an art therapist. The familiar comfort of his presence steadied my nerves as we drove across town toward the historic district. Fall had painted Cedar Grove in brilliant reds and golds, but I barely noticed the beauty today. "Have you told your mom?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Zach asked as we turned onto Maple Street, where grand old homes stood testament to the town's prosperous past. "I tried calling," I said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Got her voicemail. Left a message, but who knows if she'll even check it while she's in Bali with husband number 3. My mother had left Cedar Grove after the divorce, reinventing herself with each new marriage. She sent birthday cards with generous checks, but had gradually faded from my day-to-day life. Her absence had once been a wound. Now it was just a fact, like the changing of seasons. As we approached my grandmother's house, I slowed the car, scanning the street for any sign of my father's BMW or Vanessa's white Range Rover. The driveway was empty, but a small blue sedan I didn't recognize was parked at the curb. "Someone's there," I whispered, anxiety tightening my chest. "Want to come back later?" Zach asked. I shook my head. "No, it might be Martha, the housekeeper. She's been with Grandma forever. She'll let me in." I parked a few houses down, just in case. Grandma's Victorian stood proud among its neighbors, its pale yellow exterior and white trim immaculately maintained, the wraparound porch adorned with hanging baskets of fading summer flowers. I'd spent countless weekends here as a child, especially after the divorce when my father was busy building his new life with Vanessa and my mother was discovering herself in ashrams across India. Walking up the familiar stone path, childhood memories washed over me. Helping Grandma tend her roses, learning to bake her famous apple tarts in the spacious kitchen, listening to stories of Cedar Grove's past as we shelled peas on the porch. Swing. This house had been more home to me than anywhere else. I rang the doorbell, my other hand clutching my key in my pocket, ready if needed. Footsteps approached, and the heavy oak door swung open to reveal not Martha, but an elderly man, with wire-rimmed glasses and a somber expression. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gentle but formal. "I'm Rebecca Mitchell, Margaret Everett's granddaughter," I explained, fighting to keep my voice steady. I need to collect something personal she wanted me to have." The man's expression softened. "Ah, Rebecca. Yes, of course. I'm Harold Watkins, your grandmother's attorney. Please, come in. And your friend." "Zach Reynolds," I said. "He's with me." Mr. Watkins nodded and stepped aside, allowing us into the familiar entry hall with its gleaming hardwood floors and antique console table where Grandma always left her mail. The house smelled of lemon polish and the faint lingering scent of Grandma's rose perfume. My throat tightened at the realization I would never again be greeted by her warm embrace in this hallway. "I was just reviewing some documents in Margaret's study," Mr. Watkins explained, leading us toward the back of the house. "I'm preparing for a meeting with the family after the funeral service." The study had always been my favorite room. Walls, lined with bookshelves, the large desk positioned to catch the morning light from the east-facing windows, comfortable leather chairs arranged around a small fireplace. It was here that Grandma had taught me to play chess, had listened to my teenage angst without judgment, had encouraged my interest in art when my father had dismissed it as a useless hobby. And it was here that her writing desk stood, A.I.'s delicate Queen Anne piece that had belonged to her mother before her. The desk where the journal was hidden, and where, presumably, the letter she'd wanted me to find would be. "Please, sit down." Mr. Watkins gestured to the leather chairs. "I must say, I'm glad you've come. I was planning to contact you directly, after the funeral, but this saves some time." His words confused me. Why would Grandma's lawyer need to contact me? "Mr. Watkins, I don't understand. My father made it very clear I'm not welcome at the funeral. I only came to collect something personal Grandma wanted me to have." The attorney's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "Not welcome? That's interesting." He cleared his throat. "Margaret was very specific about her funeral arrangements. She left detailed instructions that you were to be not only included, but given a place of honor as a pallbearer." The shock must have shown on my face because, Mr. Watkins continued, his voice gentler, "Rebecca, your grandmother amended her will 3 years ago, shortly after what she referred to in our meetings as the family disagreement. She was very clear about her wishes." My mind raced, trying to process this information. Grandma had made changes to her will after my estrangement from my father? The family disagreement that had resulted in me being effectively cut off financially and emotionally? "What kind of changes?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Watkins glanced at Zach, then back to me. "I would normally wait until the official reading after the funeral, but given the circumstances, Margaret left explicit instructions that you were to be informed immediately if any attempt was made to exclude you from the funeral, or if you came here seeking answers before then." He reached for his briefcase, removing a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma's elegant handwriting. "She asked me to give you this privately, ahead of the official proceedings." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. This wasn't the letter I'd come seeking in the writing desk. This was something else entirely. Something official, delivered by her attorney. "I'll give you some privacy," Mr. Watkins said, rising from his chair. I have some calls to make. Take all the time you need." When the door closed behind him, Zach moved to sit beside me. "You okay, Beck?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of Grandma's personal stationery, her monogrammed "Me" at the top in navy blue. "My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and someone, likely your father, has tried to keep you from saying goodbye to me properly. I anticipated this might happen, which is why I've made arrangements with Harold to ensure you receive this letter. First, know that I have never been more proud of anyone than I am of you. Your courage in following your own path, using your talent to help children heal through art, and standing firm in your convictions even when it cost you dearly, these are the actions of someone with true character. Second, there are things about our family you don't know. Things I've protected you from, perhaps for too long. The journal you found, yes, I saw you discover it during your last visit, contains many of these truths. It's important you read it all before the reading of the will on Saturday after the funeral. A funeral you have every right to attend, regardless of what anyone says. Finally, my darling girl, know that I have made provisions to ensure your future is secure and that the truth, all of it, comes to light. The path forward may not be easy, but you have more strength than you know and more allies than you realize. All my love, Grandma Maggie. P.S. The combination to my wall safe is your birthday. You'll find what you need there. I read the letter twice, then handed it silently to Zach. My mind was spinning. Wall safe? I'd had no idea there was a safe in this house, and I'd explored every inch of it as a child. "Becca," Zach said after reading the letter, "this is big. Whatever's going on here, your grandmother was clearly preparing for exactly what's happening." I stood up, moving instinctively toward the large portrait of my grandfather that hung over the fireplace. He had died before I was born, but his stern presence had always watched over this room. The heavy frame seemed to hold no secrets, but when I ran my fingers along the ornate edge, I felt a small latch on the right side. With a gentle pull, the portrait swung away from the wall, revealing the door of a safe built into the brick of the fireplace. "How did you know it would be there?" Zach asked, joining me. "I didn't," I admitted. "But Grandma always said Grandpa liked to keep things hidden in plain sight." My hands shook as I entered the 6 digits of my birthday. The safe door opened with a soft click, revealing several stacked documents, a small jewelry box, and a USB drive. "Ms. Mitchell?" Mr. Watkins's voice came from the doorway. "I see you found Margaret's safe. Good." I turned, suddenly worried I'd overstepped. "I'm sorry, He waved away my concern. "No need to apologize. Margaret told me you'd find it. She was quite confident in your abilities." He stepped further into the room. "I've made those calls, including one to the funeral home. Your grandmother's wishes will be honored, regardless of any family objections." I felt a rush of gratitude toward this man who was enforcing Grandma's wishes even in the face of what must have been my father's explicit instructions. "Thank you," I said simply. Mr. Watkins nodded. "Now, I should inform you that your father and Mrs. Mitchell will be arriving within the hour to discuss funeral arrangements. I would suggest you take whatever you need from the safe now, along with anything else your grandmother wanted you to have. The writing desk." I still needed to find the letter Grandma had specifically mentioned during our last visit. "Mr. Watkins, before they arrive, there's something in Grandma's writing desk I need to get. She told me about it the last time I saw her." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, yes. The letter in the hidden compartment. Margaret mentioned you might come looking for it." He hesitated. "Rebecca, I should prepare you. The contents of that letter, combined with what's in the safe and the journal you found, they tell a story that may change how you see your family Margaret struggled for years with whether to reveal everything. My stomach tightened. What kind of story? It's not my place to say. Margaret wanted you to discover it yourself, in her words. He glanced at his watch. You should hurry. Thomas is nothing if not punctual. I moved to the writing desk, my fingers automatically finding the small lever underneath that released the false bottom in the top drawer. A secret Grandma had shown me years ago when I'd admired the desk's craftsmanship. Inside was an envelope, older and more worn than the one Mr. Watkins had given me, my name written in the same elegant hand. I slipped it into my bag along with the documents and USB drive from the safe, leaving the jewelry box for the moment. Whatever secrets lay in these papers, I would need time and privacy to process them. Zach, let's go, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Watkins, thank you. Will I see you at the funeral? Indeed, and at the reading afterward. A small, tight smile crossed his face. I think you'll find it illuminating. We left through the back door, cutting through the garden where Grandma had taught me the names of every flower and herb. The garden where, I now realized, she had also taught me about resilience, about how some plants needed to be cut back severely to return stronger, about how others spread their roots underground, unseen but powerful. As we reached my car, I saw my father's BMW turning onto the street. Instinctively, I ducked behind a large hydrangea bush, pulling Zach with me. We watched in silence as my father and Vanessa emerged from the car, both dressed in impeccable business attire despite the occasion, both wearing expressions of grim determination. That was close, Zach whispered as they disappeared into the house. Too close, I agreed, my heart pounding. Let's get out of here. Back at my apartment, I spread the contents of my bag across my small kitchen table, the letter from the writing desk, the documents from the safe, what appeared to be property deeds, investment statements, and a sealed envelope labeled proof, the USB drive that presumably contained digital versions of whatever evidence Grandma had been collecting, and the journal, which I'd retrieved from my bedroom where I'd hidden it after my hasty exit from Grandma's house 2 days earlier. Where do we start? Zach asked, taking a seat across from me. I reached for the letter from the writing desk. At the beginning. Unlike the note Mr. Watkins had given me, this envelope contained several pages, the paper yellowed with age. The date at the top indicated it had been written nearly 30 years ago, before I was even born. My dearest granddaughter, if you're reading this, then I've finally found the courage to tell you the truth, or I've passed on and left instructions for you to find this letter. Either way, it means you're ready to know the story I've kept, hidden for too long. It begins, as many complicated stories do, with love, though not the kind celebrated in fairy tales. Your grandfather, Edward Everett, was a powerful man in Cedar Grove, respected and feared in equal measure. He built Everett Fine Furnishings from nothing, creating an empire that brought both wealth and influence. I married him knowing his strength, but not fully understanding his ruthlessness. What you must understand is that your father, Thomas, is not Edward's biological son. I gasped, the letter trembling in my hands. Zach leaned forward, his expression concerned, but I shook my head and continued reading. Before you were born, before your father was born, I loved another man, Robert. Cooper, Sarah Cooper's brother. He was kind and gentle, everything Edward was not. Edward was away on business often. Our marriage already a hollow arrangement based more on social standing than affection. Robert and I planned to leave together, to start a new life elsewhere. But Edward discovered our plan. Rather than divorce, which would have scandalized him in the business community, he offered a deal. I would stay, claim the child I was carrying was his, and maintain the illusion of our perfect marriage. In exchange, Robert would receive financial backing for the business he dreamed of starting, and the scandal would remain buried. Robert refused the deal at first. But Edward had investigators find certain irregularities in Robert's father's business dealings, irregularities that could have sent his elderly father to prison. The choice became impossible: Robert's freedom and his father's final years, or our happiness together. We chose security over love. Robert left Cedar Grove. I remained as Edward's wife. Thomas was born and raised as an Everett, never knowing the truth of his parentage. Edward, to his credit, never treated him differently, though I always wondered if that was genuine affection or simply commitment to the lie we'd created. When Edward died 20 years ago, I finally reconnected with Robert, who had built a successful life elsewhere but never married. He had never stopped loving me, just as I had never stopped loving him. We were discreet, meeting only when I traveled out of state, maintaining the secret for Thomas's sake. Robert passed away 5 years ago, never having met his son. Why? Tell you this now? Because the wealth that has shaped our family's path, the Everett fortune that Thomas has pursued with such single-minded devotion, has roots in this deception. And because I see in you the same courage and integrity that Robert possessed, the willingness to choose what's right over what's easy or profitable. There is more to the story. Evidence in the safe that shows how Edward's business practices went beyond ruthless to criminal at times. Evidence I've protected your father from discovering. Evidence that, should it become public, would unravel not just our family history, but potentially the foundation of several prominent Cedar Grove families. I've watched your father become increasingly like Edward in all the worst ways, particularly after meeting Vanessa, whose ambition seems limitless. I've watched them try to mold you into their image of success, and I've been so proud to see you forge your own path instead. I don't know what you'll choose to do with this information. That choice belongs to you alone. But know that I've made provisions in my will to ensure you have the resources to make that choice freely, without financial pressure. All my love. Margaret. I set the letter down, my hands shaking. My father isn't who he thinks he is, I whispered. His whole identity, his obsession with the Everett name and legacy, it's built on a lie. Zach reached across the table, covering my hand with his. Becca, this is... I don't even know what to say. There's more, I said, reaching for the journal. This has to be what she was referencing. The leather-bound book contained entries spanning decades, some brief notes, others pages, long reflections. I flipped through until I found entries from around the time my father married Vanessa. November 12th, 1999. Thomas brought his new fiancée to dinner tonight, Vanessa Davis, beautiful, poised, and completely aware of what she wants, the Everett, name and fortune. She asked very specific questions about the business, about our properties, about the family trust. Thomas was oblivious, interpreting her interest as enthusiasm for joining the family. I recognize ambition when I see it. I lived with Edward for 30 years, after all. I worry about Rebecca. She's only 5, still grieving Karen's absence after the divorce, and Vanessa seems to view her as an inconvenience rather than a child in need of love. When Rebecca spilled her milk, the look Vanessa gave her was chilling. Thomas didn't notice, too entranced by his new love to see his daughter's discomfort. I must be careful, but I will protect Rebecca. Edward taught me how to manage family, trusts, and legal protections. I never thought I'd use those lessons this way, but I'm grateful for them now. I continued flipping through the journal, finding entries about my childhood, about Vanessa's growing control over my father, about business decisions that troubled my grandmother. July 15th, 2015. Rebecca announced at dinner that she wants to study art therapy instead of business. Thomas erupted, saying no daughter of his would waste her time on such a useless degree. I saw the familiar stubborn set of Rebecca's jaw, not Edward's determination as Thomas might think, but Robert's quiet resolve. She won't be deterred easily. Vanessa suggested cutting financial support if Rebecca pursues this path. Tough love, she called it. There was nothing loving in her tone. I interjected that educational decisions belong to Rebecca, and Thomas looked at me with such betrayal, you would think I'd suggested burning down the store. After they left, I called my attorney. It's time to restructure my will and the family. Trust Edward established. I need to ensure Rebecca's future is protected, whatever path she chooses. Then, the entries from 3 years ago, around the time of my estrangement, October 3rd, 2020. The confrontation at the company gala was inevitable. Rebecca standing her ground, defending her work with disadvantaged children through art therapy. Thomas dismissing it as playing with crayons while real professionals do the actual work of helping people. Vanessa's calculated interjection that perhaps Rebecca hasn't lived up to the Everett potential. I watched my granddaughter stand tall amidst Cedar Grove's elite and declare that helping children heal through creative expression was worth more than social standing or profit margins. Thomas publicly disowned her, right there between the ice sculpture and the champagne fountain. Rebecca called me in tears afterward. I told her to come stay with me, but she refused. I need to do this on my own, Grandma, she said. Such strength in that girl. Tomorrow I meet with Harold to finalize the changes to my will. Thomas and Vanessa will be furious when they discover what I've done, but I've had enough of secrets destroying lives. It's time for truth, however uncomfortable. The final entry was dated just days before her death, October 10th, 2023. The tests came back today. The doctor gave me 6 months, but I can feel the truth in my bones. It won't be nearly that long. I've made peace with dying, but not with leaving Rebecca to face what's coming alone. I've arranged everything, the documents in the safe, the letter in the desk, the trust restructured to support her completely. Harold knows what to do. The USB drive contains copies of all Edward's hidden records, the fraudulent property, deals, the environmental violations covered up, the workers silenced after injuries. All of it. Thomas has become so much like Edward, consumed by appearances and power. Yesterday, he and Vanessa presented plans to demolish the historic buildings downtown, including the community center where Rebecca works, to build luxury condominiums. They've already begun pressuring the city council. They don't know I own controlling interest in that property through one of Edward's old holding companies. Rebecca visits tomorrow. I'll try to tell her everything, prepare her. If I can't find the strength, this journal and the letter will have to guide her. My brave, beautiful granddaughter. She has Robert's heart and my determination. She'll need both for what lies ahead. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. She knew she was dying. She tried to tell me that day, but Vanessa showed up unexpectedly. And now your dad and Vanessa are planning to tear down the community center? Zach's voice rose in alarm. We both knew what that meant. Dozens of at-risk kids in our programs would lose their safe space, their lifeline. Not just the center, I said, reaching for the property documents from the safe. According to these, they're planning to redevelop the entire historic district, affordable housing, small businesses, everything, into luxury condos and upscale retail. I spread out the deeds on the table. But Grandma owned most of these properties through holding companies. And according to this, I held up a trust document. She's transferred ownership of all of it to a new entity that takes effect upon her death. Let me guess, Zach said. You're the trustee of that entity. I nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility settling over me. Not just the trustee. According to this, I'm the sole heir to everything. The properties, the business, the investments. All of it. Estimated value. $3.8 million. The room fell silent as the magnitude of what I'd discovered sank in. My grandmother hadn't just left me financially secure. She'd left me with the power to preserve or destroy the legacy my father thought was his birthright. She'd left me with truth that would shatter his identity. and she'd left me with evidence of corporate crimes that could damage prominent families throughout Cedar Grove. "What are you going to do?" Zach finally asked. I looked at the scattered documents, at the journal containing decades of my grandmother's secrets and regrets, at the USB drive that likely contained enough evidence to upend Cedar Grove's social hierarchy. "First," I said, my voice finding new strength, "I'm going to my grandmother's funeral, whether my father likes it or not. I owe her that much." And then, I thought of the community center, of the children whose lives were being transformed through our programs, of the small businesses in the historic district that provided livelihoods for dozens of families. Then I'm going to finish what Grandma started. It's time for some truth in this family, no matter how uncomfortable. Outside my window, the autumn sun was setting over Cedar Grove, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Somewhere, across town, my father and Vanessa were making funeral arrangements for a woman whose final act had been to ensure that right, not might, would prevail. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Confronting my father with the truth of his parentage, stopping the development plans, managing the properties and business I'd inherited, these challenges loomed large. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose that transcended my own needs and hurts. Grandma Maggie had protected me my whole life. Now it was my turn to protect her legacy. Not the Everett name or fortune, but the values she'd quietly upheld, even while living within a lie. I gathered the documents, securing them in my fireproof lockbox. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and likely more pain. But it would also bring the funeral of the woman who had loved me unconditionally and believed in me absolutely. I would honor her not just with my presence, but with the courage to stand for truth in a family built on secrets. "Want company?" "Tomorrow?" Zach asked as he helped me clean up the kitchen, the late evening shadows deepening around us. "Always," I said, grateful beyond words for his steady friendship. I have a feeling I'm going to need all the allies I can get. Little did I know just how true those words would prove to be in the days ahead, or how drastically life in Cedar Grove was about to change for everyone, especially for a family built on carefully constructed lies that were about to come crashing down. The morning of Grandma Maggie's funeral dawned with a gentle autumn rain that seemed fitting for the occasion. Soft, dignified, and thoroughly cleansing. I stood at my window watching droplets trace patterns down the glass, each carrying tiny fragments of light despite the gray sky. My black dress hung pressed and ready on my closet door, the only formal attire I'd kept after donating most of my suitable clothes from my previous life. "You ready for this?" Zach's voice came from my small kitchen where he was making coffee, having arrived early to provide moral support. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing the documents we'd discovered and formulating a plan. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, turning from the window. The truth was, I felt strangely calm. The shock and grief of the previous day had crystallized into something more focused, a determination to honor Grandma's final wishes and protect what she valued most. "I made some calls this morning," Zach said, handing me a steaming mug. "Sarah?" Cooper agreed to meet us after the funeral. She wants to help. Sarah Cooper, the sister of Robert Cooper, my biological grandfather according to Grandma's letter. A woman who had likely kept her brother's secret for decades. "How much did you tell her?" I asked cautiously. "Just that Margaret left you. Some information that raised questions about family history and that you wanted to talk." She seemed, I don't know, almost relieved, like she's been waiting for this conversation. I nodded, sipping the coffee that was exactly how I liked it. Zach knew me too well. "And Martha? Any luck reaching her?" "Left a message. If she's helping with funeral arrangements, she's probably busy today. But her daughter said she'd make sure Martha calls us back." Martha Gomez, Grandma's housekeeper for over 30 years, would know more about the day-to-day realities of my grandmother's life than perhaps anyone. The journal entries suggested she might have been one of the few people Grandma trusted completely. "We should head out soon," I said, glancing at the clock. "I want to be there early before my father can try to have me removed." Thrikivura Green. Memorial Chapel stood on a gentle hill overlooking Cedar Lake, its white spire reaching toward the clearing sky as we arrived. The rain had stopped, leaving everything washed clean and glistening. Several cars were already in the parking lot, including Harold Watkins's blue sedan and, I noted with a twist in my stomach, my father's BMW. "Remember," Zach said as we walked toward the chapel, "Watkins confirmed that your grandmother's wishes supersede your father's. You have every right to be here." I squeezed his hand in silent thanks, drawing strength from his unwavering support. We entered through the side door, avoiding the main entrance where I knew my father would be greeting mourners. The chapel was adorned with arrangements of white roses and lavender, Grandma's favorites from her garden, and soft classical music played from discreet speakers. Near the front, Harold Watkins stood conversing quietly with the funeral director. He spotted us and excused himself, coming to meet us halfway down the aisle. "Ms. Mitchell," he said with a formal nod that somehow conveyed both sympathy and approval. "I'm glad you're here. Everything is arranged according to your grandmother's wishes. You'll be seated in the family section, front row left." "My father," I began, "has been informed of the seating arrangement," Watkins finished for me. "He was displeased, but the matter is not open to negotiation. Margaret's instructions were quite specific." I felt a rush of gratitude toward my grandmother for her foresight, and toward Watkins for his unwavering execution of her wishes. "Thank you," I said simply. "The service begins in 20 minutes, he continued. "As a pallbearer, you'll need to be in position before then. Mr. Reynolds can show you where to go." He handed Zach a program with additional notes paperclipped to it. As Watkins moved away to greet other arrivals, Zach and I found a quiet alcove where we could review the program. Grandma had planned a service that perfectly reflected her understated elegance, classical music she had loved, poetry readings rather than religious texts, and personal reflections from selected speakers. "Look at this," Zach said, pointing to the list of speakers. "You're scheduled to speak." My name was indeed listed between Martha Gomez and Dr. Eleanor Chen, director of the Cedar Grove Children's Foundation, where Grandma had been a major denier. I felt a momentary panic. I had prepared nothing, but as quickly as the fear rose, it subsided. I knew exactly what I wanted to say about the woman who had been my greatest champion. People were beginning to file into the chapel now, faces I recognized from the neighborhood around Grandma's house, staff from Everett Fine Furnishings, members of the various charitable boards she had served on. Each person who passed gave me sympathetic smiles or gentle touches on the shoulder. I realized with a start how many of these people knew me, remembered me from years of accompanying Grandma to community events. Then I saw him, my father entering from a side door near the front, Vanessa at his side like an elegant shadow. He hadn't noticed me yet, his attention focused on examining the floral arrangements as if inspecting merchandise. Vanessa, however, scanned the room with calculated precision. When her gaze landed on me, her perfect features tightened almost, imperceptibly before she leaned to whisper in my father's ear. His head snapped up, eyes finding mine across the chapel. For a moment, raw emotion flickered across his face. Confusion, anger, perhaps a flash of something deeper, before his expression hardened into the cool mask I'd grown accustomed to over the years. He took a half step in my direction before Watkins smoothly intercepted him, guiding him toward the front row on the right side. "It's time," Zach murmured, indicating where the other pallbearers were gathering near the entrance. I recognized my Uncle Robert, my father's brother, or rather, as I now knew, no blood relation at all, and my cousin Jessica among them. 3 other people I didn't know completed the group. Uncle Robert's eyebrows shot up in surprise when I approached, but to his credit, he simply gave me a brief hug. "Didn't know you'd be here, Becca," he said quietly. "Good to see you." The funeral director provided brief instructions, and then it was time. The weight of the casket against my shoulder felt right somehow, one final act of service for the woman who had carried so many burdens for others. We moved in solemn procession down the aisle, and I kept my eyes fixed ahead, refusing to glance at my father as we passed his pew. Once the casket was in place and we had taken our seats, the service began. I sat stiffly, acutely aware of my father's presence across the aisle, of Vanessa's occasional glares, of the curious glances from those who knew about our estrangement. But as speakers shared memories of Grandma, her generosity, her quiet strength, her unwavering principles, I felt myself relaxing into the collective appreciation of a life well lived. When Martha stepped up to speak, her warm voice carrying, clearly despite her age, I leaned forward. If anyone knew the real Margaret Everett, it was Martha. For 32 years, I watched Margaret Everett live with dignity through joy and sorrow, she began. Many of you saw her public face, the gracious hostess, the generous philanthropist, the shrewd businesswoman. I saw the woman who sat in her kitchen late at night, looking through family photos, and sometimes crying for what might have been. I saw someone who made difficult choices and lived with their consequences without complaint. Martha's gaze swept the room before settling briefly on me. She found her greatest joy in her granddaughter, Rebecca. In Rebecca, Margaret saw hope for the future, a chance for honesty and authenticity to prevail over pretense. From the corner of my eye, I saw my father shift uncomfortably. Margaret Everett knew the value of truth, Martha continued. In her final months, she spoke often about regrets, not for the good she had done, but for the truths she had left unspoken for too long. The secrets we keep to protect others, she told me, sometimes end up harming them most of all. Martha's words hung in the air, and I wondered how many people in this room understood their true significance. How many were part of the web of secrets Grandma had maintained for decades? Then it was my turn to speak. As I approached the podium, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This moment, honoring Grandma while standing firmly in my own truth, was exactly what she would have wanted. My grandmother taught me many things, I began, my voice steady. She taught me to recognize beauty in unexpected places. She taught me that kindness is not weakness. She taught me that wealth is measured not in dollars, but in how many lives you touch for the better. I paused, looking out at the gathered faces. What Grandma Maggie valued most was authenticity. She respected people who lived their truth, even when it was difficult. In the last few years of her life, as I chose a path that disappointed some family members, she told me something I'll never forget. The Everett name may open doors, Rebecca, but it's what you do after walking through them that matters. My eyes found my father's. Grandma supported my work as an art therapist at the community center because she understood that helping traumatized children heal through creative expression is valuable work, even if it doesn't generate profit or prestige. She taught me that legacy isn't about buildings or bank accounts. It's about the changes we create in human lives. I could see tension in my father's jaw, in the way Vanessa's manicured hand gripped his arm. They knew I was challenging their value system in the most public way possible. In her final days, I continued, Grandma talked about truth and reconciliation, about how it's never too late to choose a different path. I believe she died hopeful that the divisions in our family might still heal, that truth might eventually prevail over pride or appearances. I took a deep breath. I hoped to honor her by making that vision a reality. As I returned to my seat, I felt lighter somehow, as if speaking those words had released something that had been trapped inside me. Zach squeezed my hand, and Martha, sitting nearby, gave me a small nod of approval. The remainder of the service passed in a blur of music and readings. When it concluded, people began filing out toward the cemetery for the burial. I found myself surrounded by well-wishers, many expressing surprise and pleasure at seeing me. "Rebecca," my father's voice cut through the conversations around me. He stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. A word. Zach moved protectively closer to me, but I touched his arm. "It's okay. I'll meet you outside." My father led me to a quiet corner of the now emptying chapel. Up close, I could see strain in his face that hadn't been visible from a distance. New lines around his eyes, a certain hollowness to his cheeks. "Your speech was inappropriate," he began, his voice low. "This is neither the time nor place to air family disagreements." "I spoke the truth, Dad, and I didn't mention our estrangement specifically. You implied that I don't value human lives over profit. That's hardly subtle, Rebecca." I studied him, seeing him with new eyes after everything I'd learned. Did he have any of Robert Cooper's features? Any hint of the kind, gentle man Grandma had described? It was impossible to tell. This man before me had been shaped by 3 decades of believing himself to be Edward Everett's son, heir to a legacy built on ruthless ambition. "Why am I here, Dad?" I asked quietly. "You made it abundantly clear on the phone that I wasn't welcome." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Watkins insisted. Apparently your grandmother left specific instructions. And you couldn't even call to tell me? You were just going to let me find out some other way that I could attend after all?" I made my position clear. Watkins overruled me. There was nothing more to discuss. His eyes narrowed slightly. "How did you know to come to the funeral?" "Home today?" "Watkins said he was trying to reach you." "I went to Grandma's house yesterday. We ran into each other." Something shifted in my father's expression. Wariness, perhaps. "You were in the house? Why?" "Grandma asked me to pick up something personal before she died. A letter." I watched him carefully, looking for any reaction. His face remained impassive, but I noticed his hand tighten on the pew beside him. "Did Watkins let you in?" "I have a key, Dad. I've always had a key." This was news to him. I could see the slight widening of his eyes. "What letter? What did it say?" "We should be getting to the cemetery," I deflected, not ready yet to reveal what I knew. "People are waiting." Frustration flashed across his face, but he nodded stiffly and gestured for me to precede him toward the door. As we walked, he asked, "Will you be at the reading of the will after the burial?" "Of course. Grandma would have wanted me there." "Rebecca," he said, pausing at the doorway, "whatever issues existed between us, Margaret was still my mother. I hope you'll respect that today." The irony of his statement in light of what I now knew was almost too much to bear. I simply nodded and continued outside where Zach was waiting by his car. "Everything okay?" he asked as I approached. "As okay as it can be," I replied, watching my father stride toward his BMW where Vanessa waited. He's suspicious about why I was at the house yesterday, and he doesn't know what was in the letter. "Are you going to tell him about Robert Cooper?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until after the will reading. There's something else going on here, Zach. Something about the development plans. Did you notice how tense he got when I mentioned being in the house? It wasn't just about seeing me there. He was worried about what I might have found." The burial service was brief but moving. Final prayers, the ceremonial placing of roses on the casket, the measured words about dust returning to dust. I stood opposite my father, the open grave between us like a physical manifestation of the gulf that had grown over the years. Yet now I understood that gulf differently, not as a simple matter of him disapproving of my career choice, but as the result of generations of secrets and unspoken truths. As we departed the cemetery for the law offices where the will would be read, I noticed several prominent Cedar Grove business leaders in attendance. Mayor Wilson, whose family had deep ties to the Everetts, James Richardson, head of the largest real estate development company in the county, and Philip Montgomery, whose banking family had financed most of the major commercial projects in town for decades. "Why are they all here?" I murmured to Zach as we walked to his car. "Good question. I didn't think your grandmother was that connected to Montgomery or Richardson." She wasn't, as far as I know. And they definitely weren't close friends. A suspicion began to form in my mind. "The USB drive. We need to look at it before the will reading." "We don't have time," Zach pointed out. "The reading starts in 20 minutes. I made a quick decision. "Then you go ahead to Watkins's office. Tell him I'm stopping by my apartment to change and will be there shortly. I need to see what's on that drive." Zach hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" "I'll be fine. The reading won't start without me. Watkins made that clear. And I need to know what we're walking into." Reluctantly, Zach agreed. He dropped me at my apartment with a promise to stall if necessary and to text me if anything important happened before I arrived. Once inside, I quickly connected the USB drive to my laptop. It contained dozens of folders, each meticulously labeled and dated. I opened the one titled Cedar Grove Historic District Development Plans and found myself looking at detailed proposals dated just 3 months earlier. Plans showing the complete redevelopment of 6 blocks of the historic downtown, including the community center. More disturbing were the environmental impact reports that had been altered to hide contamination issues on several properties, and documentation of payoffs to city inspectors to overlook code violations. My father's signature appeared on multiple documents, alongside those of Richardson, Montgomery, and, most surprising, Mayor Wilson himself. Another folder labeled Property Holdings, ME Trusts, contained spreadsheets detailing my grandmother's considerable real estate holdings through various trusts and shell companies. With a shock, I realized she owned controlling interest in nearly 60% of the properties slated for redevelopment in their scheme. A third folder, simply labeled Proof, contained what appeared to be recorded conversations, audio files with dates and names. I clicked on one labeled Thomas Everett, Richardson, Montgomery, 10/01/23. My father's voice filled the room. "The old woman doesn't need to know the details. Once this goes through, Everett Enterprises will control the entire district. The community center property is the last piece we need." "And you're sure she'll sign it over?" Richardson's voice, smooth and practiced. "She's dying. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her at this point. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, it'll be too late. The demolition will already be underway." "What about your daughter?" Montgomery asked. "I heard she works at that center." My father's laugh was cold and unfamiliar. "Rebecca made her choice. She wanted to play with crayons instead of learning the business. She's not a factor." I stopped the recording, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and vindication. This wasn't just about redeveloping property. It was about deception at multiple levels, environmental cover-ups, and a willingness to destroy a vital community resource without a second thought. I checked the time. 10 minutes until the will. Reading was scheduled to begin. I copied the entire contents of the USB drive to my laptop as backup, then gathered my things and ordered a rideshare to Watkins's office. The law firm of Watkins, Bryson & Associates occupied the top floor of one of the few modern buildings in downtown Cedar Grove. By the time I arrived, everyone else was already assembled in the wood-paneled conference room. My father sat at one end of the large table, Vanessa beside him. Uncle Robert and Cousin Jessica sat nearby. To my surprise, Martha Gomez was also present, as was Sarah Cooper. Harold Watkins stood at the head of the table, documents arrayed before him. Ms. Mitchell," Watkins said as I entered. "We've been waiting. Please, take a seat." The only empty chair was directly opposite my father. As I sat down, I noticed Zach standing against the wall behind Watkins, evidently allowed to stay, as moral support. He gave me a subtle nod and I returned it, letting him know I'd found something significant. "Now that everyone is present, we can begin," Watkins said formally. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Margaret Everett." He adjusted his glasses and began to read the standard legal preamble. I studied the faces around the table. My father appeared confident, impatient even, as if this were a mere formality before he could get back to more important matters. Vanessa wore her usual mask of polite interest, though I noticed her eyes constantly flicking to the documents in Watkins' hands. Uncle Robert looked genuinely grieved, while Jessica seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Before I proceed to the specific bequests," Watkins continued, "Mrs. Everett included a personal statement to be read aloud." He cleared his throat and began reading. "To my family and friends gathered here today, if you are hearing these words, then I have finally found the courage in death that sometimes eluded me in life. The time has come for truth to replace the comfortable lies that have shaped our family for too long. For decades, I have protected secrets that should have been exposed. I convinced myself it was for the greater good, to preserve reputations, to ensure financial security, to prevent painful revelations. I was wrong. Secrets corrupt from within. They poison relationships and distort reality. The Everett fortune was built on my late husband Edward's business acumen, but also on practices that would not withstand ethical scrutiny. Environmental regulations circumvented, competitors undermined through questionable means, workers' rights disregarded. I remained silent, complicit in my silence. The greatest secret of all, one that has shaped our family dynamics for over 50 years, is that Thomas is not Edward Everett's biological son. His father was Robert Cooper, a kind and honorable man whom I loved deeply. Circumstances forced us apart, and Thomas was raised believing Edward was his father. Edward knew the truth but agreed to maintain the deception to avoid scandal. I have watched with growing dismay as Thomas adopted Edward's worst traits: the relentless ambition, the willingness to sacrifice principle for profit, the belief that the Everett name granted special privilege. I have watched him attempt to mold Rebecca in this same image, and I have been profoundly grateful for her resistance to these influences. Recent events have forced my hand. The plans to demolish the historic district, including the community center that serves our town's most vulnerable children, represent everything I have come to regret about the Everett legacy. I cannot allow my silence to enable further harm. The bequests that follow reflect my desire to set right what has long been wrong. I ask forgiveness from those hurt by my silence and understanding from those who may be hurt by these revelations. Most of all, I ask that you consider what legacy truly matters in the end. Stunned silence filled the room. My father had gone, deathly pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Vanessa's perfect composure had cracked, her mouth slightly open in shock. Uncle Robert stared at the table, while Jessica looked between him and my father in confusion. Watkins waited a moment, allowing the impact of Grandma's words to settle, before continuing with the specific provisions of the will. First, to my son, Thomas Mitchell Everett, I leave the sum of $100,000 to be held in trust, with the annual interest available for his use. The principal will transfer to his complete control upon the provision of verified documentation that he has undergone therapy for a minimum of 1 year with a licensed professional. I do this not as punishment, but in recognition that wealth, without wellness, is no gift at all. My father made a choked sound, somewhere between a laugh and a growl. Vanessa's hand on his arm seemed less comforting than restraining. To Vanessa Mitchell, I leave nothing. The reasons are known to her. Vanessa's face flushed with anger, but she remained silent. To my brother-in-law, Robert Mitchell, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my sincere gratitude for his loyalty to a family, not his own by blood." Uncle Robert nodded slightly, eyes downcast. "To my niece, Jessica Mitchell, I leave the sum of $200,000 to be used for educational purposes, and my collection of first edition classic novels, in recognition of our shared love of literature." Jessica's eyes widened in surprise. Apparently, this was more than she had expected. "To Martha Gomez, my loyal friend and housekeeper, I leave the sum of $300,000 and lifetime right of residence in the garden cottage on my property, with all associated maintenance costs to be covered by my estate." Martha dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, murmuring a quiet, "Gracias, señora," toward the ceiling. "To Sarah Cooper, sister of Robert Cooper, I leave the sum of $300,000 in recognition of the secret she has kept at great personal cost and with gratitude for her friendship." Sarah nodded, her expression a complex mixture of grief and vindication. "All remaining assets, including my personal residence, my controlling interest in Everett Fine Furnishings, all real estate holdings through various trusts and corporations, all investment accounts, and all personal property not otherwise specifically designated, I leave to my granddaughter, Rebecca Mitchell, with the confidence that she will use these resources to uphold the values I cherished, but too often failed, to defend." Watkins looked up from the document. "The estimated total value of these remaining assets is approximately $8 million. The silence that had greeted the personal statement was nothing compared to the charged atmosphere that now filled the room. I felt as if I could barely breathe, the weight of Grandma's trust, and the power she had just placed in my hands, settling over me like a heavy mantle. "This is absurd," my father finally exploded, slapping his hand on the table. "She wasn't in her right mind. This will is clearly the product of undue influence." He glared at me across the table. "What did you say to her? What lies did you tell her while the rest of us were respecting her privacy?" Watkins intervened smoothly. "Mr. Everett, I can assure you that Margaret was of completely sound mind when this will was executed. It was witnessed by myself, Dr. Eleanor Chen, and Judge William Harrigan. All legal requirements were meticulously observed precisely because Mrs. Everett anticipated this reaction." My father's gaze snapped to the attorney. "You knew about this? About these accusations?" "I knew the contents of Mrs. Everett's will, yes. As her attorney, that was my responsibility." Watkins' professional demeanor didn't waver. "And they are not accusations, Mr. Everett. They are statements of fact, supported by considerable documentation which Mrs. Everett has preserved." "Documentation? What documentation?" I decided it was time to speak. "The proof is on the USB drive Grandma left, Dad, along with detailed records of your development plans for the historic district, the altered environmental reports, the bribes to city officials, all of it." His face contorted with a mixture of rage and panic. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Those plans are completely legitimate business arrangements." "Really? Should we play the recording of your conversation with Richardson in Montgomery? The one where you discussed tricking Grandma into signing over property while she was dying? Or perhaps the one where you outline how the community center will be demolished before anyone can organize opposition?" Vanessa stood abruptly. "This is preposterous. We're not sitting here listening to these baseless allegations. Thomas, we're leaving." "Sit down, Mrs. Mitchell," Watkins said, his voice suddenly steely. "There are a few more provisions to address, and your presence is required by law." Reluctantly, Vanessa resumed her seat, though she perched on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. "Mrs. Everett included a final provision," Watkins continued. "Should Thomas Everett contest this will in any way, all documentation regarding the development plans, environmental violations, and financial irregularities will be immediately forwarded to the appropriate regulatory authorities and law enforcement agencies. Furthermore, DNA evidence confirming Robert Cooper as Thomas Everett's biological father will be made public. My father stared at Watkins in disbelief. She wouldn't dare. That would destroy everything. She has dared, Mr. Everett, Watkins replied calmly. The only question now is whether you will accept the terms of her will or force her hand from beyond the grave. The room fell silent again as my father grappled with the impossible position he found himself in. Everything he had believed about himself, about his birthright, about his plans for the future, all of it hanging by a thread that I now held. I need to see this supposed evidence, he finally said, his voice strained. I have the right to verify these claims. Of course, Watkins agreed. All supporting documentation is available for review by interested parties. Ms. Mitchell, as the primary beneficiary, would need to grant permission for access to the USB drive you mentioned, as that is now legally her property. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my response. I thought of the children at the community center whose safe haven was threatened. I thought of the historic district that gave Cedar Grove its character and provided livelihoods for dozens of small business owners. I thought of Grandma, who had finally chosen truth over comfortable lies. I'll make the evidence available, I said, meeting my father's gaze steadily. All of it. But first, the development plans for the historic district need to be officially withdrawn. All of them. And the community center needs to be protected with a permanent conservation easement. You're blackmailing me, my father said incredulously. I'm offering you a choice, I corrected. The same choice Grandma is offering from beyond the grave. You can accept the truth and work with me to create a better legacy, or you can fight and risk losing everything. Not just the money, but your reputation. Your freedom if there are criminal charges from the environmental violations and bribes. Vanessa leaned in to whisper urgently in my father's ear. His expression shifted through several emotions before settling into cold calculation. I'll need time to consider my options. You have 48 hours, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. After that, I'll have no choice but to assume you're choosing to contest the will, with all that entails. As the tension-filled meeting concluded, people began to file out of the conference room. Uncle Robert approached me hesitantly. Becca, if what Margaret said is true, about Thomas not being Edward's son, then you and I aren't actually related. Biologically, no, I agreed. But you've been my uncle my whole life. That doesn't change because of DNA. His weathered face softened. You sound like her. She always knew what mattered. He glanced toward my father, who was engaged in intense conversation with Watkins. He's not going to take this well. Be careful. Sarah Cooper approached next, her gray hair elegantly styled, her posture that of someone used to navigating difficult social situations. Rebecca, I'd like to speak with you, when you have time. About your grandfather, your real grandfather. Robert was my brother, and there are things you should know about him. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Tomorrow, perhaps? She nodded and pressed a business card into my hand. Call me when you're ready. As people dispersed, I found myself standing alone in the conference room with Zach, trying to process everything that had just happened. Well, he said, coming to stand beside me. That was intense. A slightly hysterical laugh escaped me. That's one word for it. I glanced at him. Did you know? About the will, I mean? Watkins gave me the broad strokes while we were waiting for you. He thought you should have someone prepared to support you. Zach's steady gaze met mine. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? My grandmother was gone. My family history had been revealed as largely fabrication. I'd just become a millionaire and simultaneously made an enemy of my father. and I was now responsible for decisions that would affect countless lives in Cedar Grove. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I think I will be. I looked out the window toward the historic district of Cedar Grove, where autumn leaves drifted down onto streets lined with buildings that had stood for generations, streets that I now had the power to protect or transform. She trusted you with all this for a reason, Zach said quietly. I know. I turned back to him, feeling a strange sense of clarity emerging from the chaos of emotions. And I'm not going to let her down. As we left the law office, I noticed my father waiting by the elevators, alone. Vanessa nowhere in sight. When he saw me, he stepped forward, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said. Privately. I glanced at Zach, who nodded slightly. I'll wait for you downstairs, he said, stepping into the open elevator. When we were alone, my father's carefully maintained facade cracked. Is it true? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. About Robert Cooper? The vulnerability in his question caught me off guard. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I was seeing my father without the armor of Everett pride and position. Grandma believed it was, I answered carefully. There's DNA evidence, apparently. He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking much older than his 52 years. All my life. Everything I thought I knew about myself. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of compassion. Whatever his faults, this revelation had just shattered the foundation of his identity. Dad, this doesn't have to be the end of everything. It could be a beginning, a chance to build something different. He looked at me sharply. By holding my past hostage? By threatening to expose family secrets unless I bow to your demands? That's not what I want, I said earnestly. What I want is to protect what matters. The community center, the historic district, the people who depend on both. We can find a way to develop Cedar Grove that honors its character instead of erasing it. Easy for you to say now that you hold all the cards, he replied bitterly. I'm not the enemy here, Dad. Neither was Grandma. The enemy is the lie itself, the belief that the Everett name and fortune were more important than truth or human connection. He studied me for a long moment. You really believe that, don't you? I do, and I think somewhere deep down, you know I'm right. The elevator dinged, announcing its return to our floor. My father stepped back, his expression closing once more. 48 hours, he said. I'll be in touch. As I rode the elevator down to where Zach waited, I wondered what would happen next. Would my father fight or concede? Would the truth about his parentage change him? Would I be able to handle the responsibility Grandma had placed on my shoulders? I didn't have answers yet, but I did have something I hadn't possessed 3 days. Ego. The truth. The power to protect what mattered, and the determination to create a legacy that honored not just the Everett name, but the values my grandmother had ultimately chosen to embrace. The morning after the will reading dawned with a clarity that seemed almost too perfect. Golden autumn light streaming through my apartment windows, the distant mountains crisp against a cloudless sky. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with everything. That had happened, and the enormous responsibility now resting on my shoulders. Zach had stayed late, helping me organize the documents and recordings from the USB drive, creating backup copies and secure storage for everything. I made coffee and carried it to my small balcony, watching Cedar Grove come to life below. From this vantage point, I could see the edge of the historic district where the community center stood, an old brick building that had once been a library, its large windows designed to let in maximum light for readers now serving the same purpose for children creating art. 3 blocks beyond it rose the distinctive copper dome of the old courthouse, now a museum. And between them, dozens of shops, cafes, and small businesses that gave the district its character, all potentially at risk from my father's development scheme. My phone buzzed with a text from Zach. Sarah Cooper confirmed for coffee at 10. Also, heads up, you made the local news. Frowning, I opened the Cedar Grove Gazette's website to find a prominent article with the headline, Everett Heiress Revealed, Local Art Therapist Inherits Family Fortune. The accompanying photo showed me leaving the funeral, looking solemn and slightly overwhelmed. The article was surprisingly accurate, stating that I had inherited the majority of my grandmother's estate, estimated at $8 million, including controlling interest in Everett Fine Furnishings and significant real estate holdings. It noted the unexpected development given my estrangement from prominent businessman Thomas Everett, and highlighted my work at the community center rather than dismissing it as my father always had. The reporter, Andrea Kim, had also included quotes from several of my colleagues praising my commitment to the center's youth programs. The only quote from my father was a terse, "No comment at this time," which spoke volumes about his current state of mind. As I scrolled through the article, another text came through, this one from an unknown number. Ms. Mitchell, Andrea Kim from the Gazette, would appreciate a comment on your plans for the Everett business interests and your response to rumors about the historic district redevelopment project. On deadline for tomorrow's edition. I set the phone down without responding. Whatever I said now would be scrutinized from all angles. Better to meet with Sarah Cooper first and gather more information before making any public statements. The roasted bean was quieter than usual for a Saturday morning, something I was grateful for as I spotted Sarah Cooper already seated at a corner table, an elegant woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and the straight posture of someone accustomed to commanding respect. She rose slightly as I approached, extending her hand. "Rebecca, thank you for meeting me." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "I've ordered a pot of Earl Grey. Please, join me." I slid into the seat opposite her, noting the careful way she arranged her cup and saucer, precise movements that reminded me of Grandma. "Thank you for reaching out, Ms. Cooper. I have so many questions." "Sarah, please." She smiled slightly. "And I imagine you do. Finding out your family history isn't what you thought. It's disorienting at the very least." "That's one word for it," I agreed. "You knew all this time? About my father's real parentage?" Sarah nodded, pouring tea into a second cup and sliding it toward me. "I'm one of the few who did. Margaret and I became friends after the fact. Once Robert had left town and she remained with Edward. It was a complicated situation for everyone. I've read her letter and some journal entries, but there's still so much I don't understand. Why didn't Robert ever come back after Edward died? Why maintain the secret for decades?" Sarah sighed, looking past me as if seeing events from long ago. "My brother was many things, kind, talented, principled. But he wasn't a fighter, not in the way Edward was. When he left Cedar Grove, he believed it was for the best. Margaret would be secure, the child, your father, would have advantages Robert couldn't provide, and the scandal would be avoided. But later, when they reconnected. By then, nearly 20 years had passed. Your father was an adult, building his own life, with certain expectations about who he was and what he was entitled to. Margaret and Robert discussed telling him the truth many times, but they always concluded it would cause more harm than good." She shook her head slightly. "I disagreed with that decision, for what it's worth. Secrets have a way of poisoning relationships, even when people don't know they exist. I thought of my own strained relationship with my father, the distance that had grown between us long before our final rupture. Had that been influenced by the secret of his parentage, a truth hidden at the core of our family? What was he like? Robert Cooper? I asked, realizing I knew almost nothing about my biological grandfather. Sarah's face softened. He was an artist at heart. Worked in wood carving and furniture design, actually. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that Edward Everett built his fortune in the furniture business, while Robert who had the true artistic talent, struggled to make ends meet. Furniture design? I echoed, surprised. I had no idea. Oh yes, quite talented. He eventually established a modest workshop in Seattle, specialized in custom pieces. Nothing on the scale of Everett Fine Furnishings, but respected work. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small photo album. I brought these for you. Thought you might like to see him. The album contained maybe a dozen photographs spanning several decades. Robert Cooper as a young man, tall and lean with thoughtful eyes and an easy smile. Robert in a workshop, bent over an intricate carving. Robert and Sarah at what appeared to be a gallery opening. And most striking of all, a photo of Robert and Grandma together, taken perhaps 15 years ago, standing on a beach somewhere, their happiness evident despite their age. They did love each other, Sarah said softly, watching me study the photos. All those years apart didn't change that. Does my father know any of this? Has he seen these photos? Sarah shook her head. No. Margaret thought it best to keep everything completely separate. Your father has never met me. Wouldn't know me if we passed on the street. Robert died believing his son would never know who he really was. The sadness of this struck me deeply. Lives kept carefully compartmentalized, connections severed, truth buried beneath layers of propriety and pretense, all to maintain the Everett name and position. There's something else you should know, Sarah continued, her tone changing slightly. Something that might be relevant to your current situation with the historic district. I set down my teacup, suddenly alert. What is it? Robert wasn't just a furniture designer. In his later years, he became quite involved in historic preservation in Seattle. He led several successful campaigns to save architecturally significant buildings from demolition. A small smile played at her lips. Margaret followed his work closely, though from a distance. I've always suspected that her interest in protecting Cedar Grove's historic buildings was influenced by him. That would explain her ownership of so many properties in the district, I mused. I wondered why she had invested there rather than in newer developments. Exactly, and there's more. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Many of the buildings in our historic district have architectural elements, carvings, built-ins, decorative features that were Robert's work. I stared at her in surprise. What? How is that possible? Before he left Cedar Grove, Robert worked for a local construction company that specialized in restoration. He did piecework for them, mostly custom woodworking for the historic buildings. If you know what to look for, you can see his distinctive style in many of the older structures downtown, including the community center. This revelation sent my thoughts spinning in new directions. The fight to preserve the historic district wasn't just about community resources or architectural heritage. It was personal in ways I couldn't have imagined. Robert Cooper's artistic legacy was literally built into the structures my father wanted to demolish. Does my father know about this connection? That his biological father's work is in these buildings? I doubt it. The pieces aren't signed, and only a few people ever knew who created them. Margaret knew, of course. I suspect that's part of why she became so determined to protect those buildings in recent years. As our conversation continued, Sarah shared more about Robert, his quiet humor, his passion for teaching woodworking to disadvantaged youth, his deep appreciation for how craftsmanship connected generations. With each story, I felt a growing sense of connection to this man I'd never met, but whose artistic sensibility and social concerns seemed to echo my own. I should show you his workshop sometime, Sarah said as we finished our tea. I've maintained it just as he left it. Some of his tools and unfinished pieces are still there. His journals, too. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Thank you for sharing all this with me. It helps to understand the bigger picture. As we prepared to leave, Sarah touched my arm lightly. Rebecca, I know you're facing difficult decisions about what to do with everything Margaret left you, but I want you to know that I think she chose well. You have more of Robert in you than anyone might guess, and more of Margaret's strength than perhaps even you realize. Her words stayed with me as I walked toward my next appointment, a meeting with Harold Watkins to discuss the practical aspects of my inheritance. The streets were busy with Saturday shoppers, and I noticed several people doing double takes as I passed, no doubt recognizing me from the newspaper article. The sudden visibility felt strange after years of living. Quietly on the periphery of Cedar Grove's social scene, Watkins' office was quieter on weekends, the reception area empty as I arrived. The attorney greeted me himself, looking slightly less formal in a sweater rather than his usual suit jacket. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming. I have the paperwork prepared as we discussed." He led me to a smaller conference room where documents were arranged in neat stacks. We have quite a bit to cover. Over the next 2 hours, Watkins walked me through the mechanics of my inheritance, the transfer of property titles, the management structure of Everett Fine Furnishings, the various trusts and investment accounts. The sheer scale of what Grandma had left me was dizzying. "The furniture business is currently managed by Gerard Phillips," Watkins explained. "He's been with the company for 20 years and has Margaret's complete confidence. You'll want to meet with him soon, but there's no immediate action required from you. The business is stable and profitable." "And the real estate holdings?" I asked, thinking of the historic district properties. "That's a bit more complex." Watkins slid a folder toward me. "These properties are held through various entities for both tax purposes and to maintain a level of privacy about ownership. Margaret was very strategic about acquiring key properties in the historic district over the past decade, particularly after learning about the development plans." I opened the folder to find a map of downtown Cedar Grove with numerous buildings, highlighted in different colors. "She owned all of these?" "Yes. The blue properties are held through Evergreen Holdings LLC, the green through Cedar Legacy Trust, and the yellow through ME Personal Trust." Watkins adjusted his glasses. "As you can see, they form a strategic pattern, controlling interests in key blocks that would make comprehensive redevelopment impossible without your cooperation." I studied the map with growing appreciation for my grandmother's foresight. She had effectively created a preservation firewall around the most historically significant parts of downtown. This is why my father and his partners were so desperate to get her to sign over the community center property. It's the linchpin. Precisely. Without that parcel, their project remains theoretical. Watkins hesitated. "There is, however, a complication. Your father filed preliminary paperwork with the city planning department 2 weeks ago, using a document supposedly signed by Margaret that grants development rights for several key properties." My head snapped up. "What? But Grandma would never have signed that." "Indeed. And upon inspection, the signature appears questionable. Not an obvious forgery, but not consistent with her other recent signatures either. I've already filed an objection with the planning department pending. Authentication? Another deception. Another manipulation." The pattern was becoming painfully clear. "Is there anything else I should know about? Other attempts to circumvent Grandma's wishes?" Watkins' expression grew more serious. "Yes, actually. This morning I received notice that your father is considering filing a challenge to the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. His attorney contacted me informally to suggest a compromise arrangement whereby you would receive a cash settlement and he would retain control of the business and real estate holdings. Let me guess. The cash settlement would be significantly less than the true value of the assets. Approximately 1/5, by my estimation." Watkins' tone remained professional, but I detected a note of disapproval. I informed his attorney that such an arrangement would trigger the provisions regarding the release of documentation to authorities. And what did they say to that? That they would need to consult with their client. Watkins gathered some papers into a folder. Ms. Mitchell, I should warn you that this situation may become quite contentious. Your father has significant social and business connections in Cedar Grove. The Montgomery and Richardson families in particular have considerable influence. I thought of the recordings on the USB drive, the documented evidence of environmental violations and bribery. They also have considerable exposure if this information becomes public. Indeed, which makes them dangerous opponents. Watkins regarded me steadily. I don't say this to discourage you, but to ensure you're properly prepared. Margaret anticipated resistance, which is why she documented everything so meticulously. I appreciate the warning, I said, thinking through the implications. What would you recommend as next steps? First, secure your position legally by completing these transfers and filings. He indicated the documents before us. Second, meet with key personnel at Everett Fine Furnishings to establish your authority. Third, consider making a public statement about your intentions for the historic district to get ahead of any narratives your father or his associates might promote. It was solid advice, and I spent the next hour signing documents and discussing strategy. As we concluded, Watkins handed me a small ornate key. One last item, the key to your grandmother's safe deposit box at First National Bank. She was quite specific that you should access it personally rather than having the contents inventoried as part of the estate process. I took the key, wondering what else Grandma might have left for me to discover. Thank you for everything, Mr. Watkins. I know managing all this couldn't have been easy, especially with my father applying pressure. A hint of a smile crossed his professional demeanor. Margaret Everett was my client for over 30 years, Ms. Mitchell. Her instructions were always clear, and my loyalty to them is absolute. I should also mention that she paid my fees for the next 3 years in advance, anticipating that you might need ongoing legal support during this transition. That was so typically Grandma, thinking ahead, arranging details, ensuring I would have the help I needed. She thought of everything, didn't she? She tried to, Watkins acknowledged. Though I believe there are some things she hoped you would decide for yourself without her influence. As I left his office, my phone rang. Martha Gomez returning my call from yesterday. Rebecca, it's Martha. I'm sorry I missed you after the service. Can we meet? Of course, I agreed readily. Are you free now? I could come to you. Martha suggested I meet her at Grandma's house. Her house still, in my mind, though technically now mine. 20 minutes later, I was walking up the familiar stone path, autumn leaves crunching beneath my feet. Martha opened the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a warm embrace that smelled of cinnamon and lemon polish. "Mi niña," she said, softly. Come in. I've made your favorite cookies." The house felt different somehow, still Grandma's in its furnishings and arrangement, but with an emptiness that went beyond physical absence. Martha led me to the kitchen where a plate of snickerdoodles waited alongside a steaming teapot. "How are you holding up?" she asked as we settled at the kitchen table where I'd spent countless hours during childhood visits. Yesterday was a lot to take in. "I'm still processing," I admitted, accepting the tea she poured. Finding out about Robert Cooper, about Dad's real parentage, about the development plans. It's overwhelming. Martha nodded, her dark eyes sympathetic. "Your grandmother worried about how you would handle it all, but she believed in you, Rebecca. Never doubted for a moment that you were the right person to entrust with everything." "Did you know about Robert Cooper?" "See, for many years. I came to work for your grandmother just after your father was born. Even then, there were whispers. Later, when I became more friend than employee, she confided in me." Martha sipped her tea thoughtfully. Edward Everett was not an easy man to live with. Very controlling, very concerned with appearances. When he died, I hoped your grandmother would reconnect with Robert openly, but by then, too many years had passed. Too many stories established. I thought of the photos Sarah had shown me, Grandma and Robert together, happy but secret. It seems so sad, keeping their relationship hidden all those years. It was, Martha agreed. But they found joy where they could. The important thing now is what you choose to do with the truth. What would you do, Martha, if you were in my position? She considered this seriously. I would remember that buildings and businesses are not what make a legacy. People are. The lives you touch, the good you do, the truth you honor. She reached across the table to pat my hand. Your grandmother made mistakes. Staying silent. Too long was one of them, but in the end, she chose truth and reconciliation. That's the example to follow. We talked for nearly an hour, about Grandma's final months, about her hopes for me, about the community that had meant so much to her. As our conversation wound down, Martha mentioned something unexpected. She left something for you in her bedroom. Asked me to make sure you found it when the time was right. Come. I followed her upstairs to the master bedroom, a room that had always seemed slightly forbidden during my childhood visits. Martha opened the large cedar closet and reached up to the top shelf, removing a cloth-wrapped bundle. She finished it just weeks before she died, Martha said, placing it in my hands. Worked on it whenever she had the strength. I unwrapped the cloth to find a handmade quilt, exquisitely crafted from fabric scraps that I recognized with a start. Pieces of my childhood dresses, a square from the shirt I'd worn to my high school graduation, a patch from the first art smock I'd used at college. In the center, embroidered in Grandma's elegant script, the greatest art comes from truth. Love always, Grandma Maggie. Tears filled my eyes as I ran my fingers over the careful stitching. I remembered Grandma teaching me to sew when I was 8, her patient hands guiding mine through simple stitches. She must have saved these fabric scraps for decades, waiting for the right moment to create this testament to our shared history. She wanted you to know that no matter what happened, with the will, with your father, with any of it, her love for you was separate from all that. A truth of its own, Martha said softly. I hugged the quilt to my chest, feeling both the weight of loss and the comfort of enduring connection. Thank you for keeping this for me. Martha nodded, then hesitated. There's something else you should know. Your father came by this morning looking for financial documents he said your grandmother had promised him. I told him I couldn't let him take anything without your permission now. How did he react? Not well. He said some things about contesting the will, about proving you manipulated Margaret. Martha's expression hardened slightly. I reminded him that I've been here for 30 years and would testify to your grandmother's sound mind and independent decision-making. He left quite angry. This wasn't surprising, but confirmed that my father was indeed planning to fight the will despite the consequences. Thank you for standing your ground, Martha. Of course, this house, everything in it, it belongs to you now. I'm here to help however I can. As I prepared to leave, quilt carefully folded in a canvas bag Martha provided, she offered one last piece of advice. Rebecca, whatever you decide about the business, the properties, all of it, make the decision based on what you truly believe is right, not just what opposes your father or honors your grandmother. Find your own truth in all this. Her words echoed in my mind as I drove to meet Zach at the community center, where he was supervising a weekend art program. The center occupied a stately brick building from the 1920s. Its large arched windows and door frames adorned with intricate wooden carvings that I now realized might be Robert Cooper's work. The thought created an unexpected sense of connection. My unknown grandfather's art had been part of this place all along, just as it had become part of my life's work. Inside, the main room buzzed with activity. About 20 children ranging from elementary to high school age engaged in various art projects while volunteers circulated offering guidance. Zach spotted me from across the room and made his way over, his expression questioning. "Everything okay? You look like you've been crying." I touched my eyes self-consciously, not having realized the tears from Martha's revelation had left visible traces. "I'm fine, just a lot happening." Grandma made me a quilt, and I learned some things about my biological grandfather that make this fight for the historic district even more personal. Before I could elaborate, a commotion at the entrance drew our attention. My father stood in the doorway, Vanessa beside him, both dressed immaculately despite it being a weekend. They surveyed the room with obvious distaste, my father's gaze finally landing on me with laser focus. "We need to talk," he announced, striding toward us with Vanessa trailing slightly behind. "Privately." Several of the children had stopped their activities to watch, sensing tension. Zach stepped slightly in front of me, a subtle but clear protective gesture. "This isn't the place, Mr. Everett. These kids deserve a safe, uninterrupted environment." My father barely glanced at him. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," I countered, keeping my voice level. "Zach is the program director here, and you're interrupting a scheduled activity. If you want to talk, we can meet elsewhere, at a more appropriate time." Frustration flashed across my father's face. "This can't wait. You've had your fun playing the wounded daughter and righteous inheritor, but it's time to be realistic. You have no idea what you're doing with that money or those businesses." One of the teenage girls working nearby had stopped pretending not to listen, her eyes wide as she took in the confrontation. I forced a calm smile. "Dad, not here. Call my cell and we can arrange a proper meeting." "Why? So you can bring lawyers and wave those recordings around?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice but not its intensity. "You think you're so clever with your evidence and your threats. You have no idea what you're up against." Vanessa placed a manicured hand on his arm, her smile tight and artificial as she noticed more children watching. "Thomas, perhaps Rebecca is right. This isn't the appropriate venue." For once, I was grateful for Vanessa's obsession with appearances. My father glanced around, seemingly noticing for the first time how many witnesses were present. His jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Fine. My office tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring whatever legal representation you want, but come prepared to negotiate a reasonable settlement. This scorched earth approach helps no one." "I'll be there," I agreed, wanting him gone from this space. "Now please, the children are trying to work." He turned to leave but paused, his gaze sweeping over the art-covered walls and busy tables. "All this could be relocated to better facilities, you know. Part of our development plan includes a modern community arts complex, state-of-the-art studios, proper lighting, central location." "At what cost?" I challenged. "Higher fees that exclude the kids who need it most? Corporate branding everywhere? Loss of the historic architecture that makes this place special?" "Progress always has a price, Rebecca." His tone was almost patronizing. "Sometimes old things need to make way for the new. It's the natural order." "There's nothing natural about demolishing history for profit," I replied, thinking of Robert Cooper's hidden contributions to these very walls. "And some things are worth preserving, no matter how inconvenient they might be for development plans." Something in my tone must have struck a nerve, because his expression shifted subtly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features before the mask of confidence returned. Without another word, he turned and strode out, Vanessa following in his wake. As the door closed behind them, the room gradually returned to its normal buzz of activity. Zach let out a low whistle. "Well, that was intense. Are you really going to his office tomorrow?" "Yes, but not alone." I pulled out my phone. "I need to call Watkins, and I think it's time to be more proactive about what's happening here." "What are you thinking?" I gazed around the room at the children immersed in their art. Some focused on careful technique, others expressing big emotions through bold strokes, all finding voice and validation in this historic space that had sheltered generations of Cedar Grove residents, a space that now I realized connected me to my unknown grandfather as surely as DNA. I'm thinking it's time to go public with the full story, about the development plans, about the environmental violations, about all of it. Cedar Grove deserves to know what's really happening to their downtown. Zach studied me for a moment. That's going to make a lot of powerful people very unhappy. I know, but Grandma chose truth in the end, even knowing the consequences. I need to honor that choice. I pulled up Andrea Kim's contact information on my phone. And I need to control the narrative before my father tries to paint me as the irrational, vindictive daughter out to destroy his reputation. When will you do it? After meeting with him tomorrow. I'll give him one last chance to withdraw the development plans voluntarily. If he refuses, I shrugged. Then the truth comes out, whatever it costs all of us. As I sent a brief message to the reporter requesting a meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The path ahead was not the one I would have chosen, filled with conflict and public scrutiny and difficult decisions, but it was the right one. For the historic district, for the community that depended on it, and for the truth that had been buried for too long. Across the room, a young girl held up her painting for a volunteer to see, a bright, hopeful image of the very building we stood in, surrounded by trees and smiling figures. Her pride in the creation was evident in her wide smile and straight posture. This was what mattered. Creating spaces where people could grow and express themselves authentically, where history and future coexisted in productive harmony. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would not lose sight of that truth. Sunday evening found me at Sarah Cooper's cabin on the outskirts of Cedar Grove, a rustic cedar structure nestled among towering pine trees. She had invited me after I'd called her about the confrontation at the community center, suggesting I might find some clarity by seeing Robert Cooper's workshop before meeting with my father the next morning. It's just as he left it, Sarah explained, leading me through the main house to a separate studio built at the edge of the property. She unlocked the wide barn-style doors and flipped on lights that illuminated a woodworker's paradise. Tools organized with loving precision on pegboards, woodworking benches scarred from decades of use, and the distinctive sweet and earthy scent of aged wood and linseed oil. He was working on this when he died, she said, gesturing to a partially completed table in the center of the room, its legs intricately carved with a pattern of oak leaves and acorns. A commission for a family in Seattle. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, admiring the precision of the work. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Robert believed that anything worth making was worth making well, Sarah replied, moving to a large cabinet along one wall. He kept records of all his work. Sketches, client notes, photographs, including his early pieces in Cedar Grove. She withdrew a leather-bound portfolio and opened it on a clean section of workbench. Inside were meticulously organized photographs and sketches of architectural elements, doorways, staircase banisters, window frames, ceiling medallions, all featuring the same organic flowing style I'd noticed in the unfinished table. These are all in buildings downtown? I asked, studying the images with growing appreciation. Most of them. The community center has the most extensive collection. The doorway arches, the reading nook shelving, the window seat with the embedded carvings of local wildlife. Sarah pointed to several photos. Robert considered it some of his best early work. He'd be devastated to know it might be demolished. I paused on a photo of a magnificent fireplace surround carved with a scene of the mountains visible from Cedar Grove. The caption noted it was in the main lobby of the Heritage Hotel, one of the buildings slated for demolition in my father's plans. Did my father ever express interest in these carvings? In preserving them? Sarah shook her head. To my knowledge, he doesn't even know about the connection. Robert's work was never widely publicized, and as I mentioned, most pieces weren't signed. But Grandma knew. Yes, she kept track of every piece, even commissioned a few herself over the years, through intermediaries so Edward wouldn't know. Sarah turned to a section of photographs showing smaller pieces, jewelry boxes, desk, sets, picture frames. These were Margaret's. She kept them hidden from Edward, of course. The relationship between Grandma and Robert Cooper took on new dimensions as I studied the evidence of their connection. Not just the child they'd conceived, but this artistic legacy that had remained largely hidden yet present throughout Cedar Grove. My father had grown up surrounded by his biological father's work without ever knowing it. "There's something else," Sarah said, hesitating. "Something Margaret asked me to hold for you, if things went as she expected." She led me to a small office adjoining the workshop and unlocked a filing cabinet. From inside, she withdrew a manila envelope and handed it to me. "Robert left letters for Thomas, for your father. Letters he wrote over the years but never sent. Margaret thought they should go to you first, for you to decide whether your father is ready to receive them." The weight of this responsibility settled over me as I accepted the envelope. Inside were dozens of letters spanning decades, each addressed simply to "my son" and organized by date. The earliest was from 1976, shortly after my father's birth. The most recent dated just months before Robert Cooper's death 5 years ago. I opened one from the middle of the stack, dated June 1998. "My son. You graduated from college last month. I saw the announcement in the Cedar Grove Gazette that your mother sends me each week. Business administration with honors from Washington State. I wonder if you found work yet, if you'll join the Everett business as everyone expects. I've followed your baseball career through high school and college. You have a natural athleticism that reminds me of my father. He played semi-pro ball in his youth. Something else you don't know about your heritage. Sometimes I imagine meeting you by chance. Perhaps you'd commission a piece of furniture, and we'd discuss design and wood choices without you ever knowing who I really am. Would you see anything of yourself in my face? Would you recognize some familiar gesture or expression? Your mother says you're becoming more like Edward every day, ambitious, driven, focused on success. I hope you've inherited some softer traits as well, though perhaps from a distance I have no right to wish for this. Still, I hope there's room in your life for beauty beyond status, for relationships beyond their utility. I've enclosed a small carved box with this letter. 1. Margaret will never deliver, of course. I made it anyway, as I've made something for each milestone in your life. Someday perhaps you'll have them, or perhaps they'll remain in my workshop, testaments to a connection that exists only in my heart. With love from a father you've never known, Robert. I carefully refolded the letter, overwhelmed by the longing and resignation it contained. The thought of all these messages, all these handcrafted gifts, created for a son who never knew they existed, it was heartbreaking. There are other things too, Sarah said quietly. Birthday presents, graduation gifts, even a wedding gift when he married your mother. Robert made something for every important moment in Thomas's life. I looked around the workshop with new understanding. This wasn't just an artist's studio. It was a testament to a father's enduring love for his son, expressed through the only means available to him. "Why are you showing me all this now?" I asked Sarah. "Why not keep it hidden as they did for so long?" "Because secrets have taken enough from this family," she replied simply. "And because I think you need to understand the full weight of what you're fighting for. It's not just buildings or businesses. It's a legacy of artistry and integrity that deserves to be acknowledged." As I drove home later that evening, the envelope of letters secured in my bag, I found myself thinking of my father differently. not as the stern, status-conscious man who had rejected my choices, but as an unwitting victim of decisions made before he was born. He had built his identity on the Everett name and legacy, never knowing that his true heritage lay in the hands of a gifted woodworker whose artistry graced the very buildings he now sought to destroy. The next morning dawned gray and rainy, the weather matching my solemn mood as I prepared for the meeting at my father's office. I dressed with deliberate care, a tailored charcoal pantsuit I'd purchased for professional presentations at the community center rather than the designer clothes my father would have preferred, professional but authentic to who I was. Harold Watkins met me in the lobby of the Everett Enterprises building, his formal attire and leather briefcase projecting exactly the image of legal competence I needed beside me. "Are you ready for this, Ms. Mitchell?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, feeling the weight of the USB drive in my bag and thinking of the letters from Robert Cooper still hidden in my apartment. "Let's go." My father's office occupied the top floor of the building, a space designed to impress with its sweeping views of Cedar Grove and the mountains beyond. His assistant, a woman I didn't recognize, led us to the large conference room where my father waited with not just Vanessa, but James Richardson and Philip Montgomery as well. Their presence confirmed my suspicion that this meeting was about more than family reconciliation. It was a strategic business negotiation. "Rebecca," my father acknowledged with a curt nod as we entered. "Mr. Watkins." "Thomas," Watkins replied with equal formality. "I wasn't aware this would be a multi-party meeting. My client and I came prepared to discuss family matters." "The development project affects all parties present," my father responded smoothly. "Since that seems to be your primary concern, I thought it most efficient to have everyone at the table." I took a seat across from him, maintaining eye contact. "Actually, my primary concern is honoring Grandma's wishes and protecting her legacy. The development project is simply one aspect of that." Vanessa made a small sound of derision, quickly, masked as a cough. Richardson and Montgomery exchanged glances but remained silent, clearly content to let my father take the lead. "Let's be direct," my father began. The will reading was theatrical and designed for maximum dramatic effect. My mother was clearly not in her right mind in her final months, influenced by whoever had her ear at the time. His gaze flicked dismissively toward Watkins. "We can waste time and resources fighting this in court, generating negative publicity for everyone involved, or we can reach a reasonable settlement." "And what do you consider reasonable?" I asked. "You receive a cash settlement of $1 million, tax-free. The business and real estate holdings remain with the family, meaning myself, as the only one with the experience to manage them properly. We agree to establish a small foundation in my mother's name to support arts education, which you could direct if you wish. Everyone maintains their dignity and reputation." "And the development project?" "Proceeds as planned, with your name added to the community arts complex as a concession to your concerns." I opened my bag and removed a folder containing printouts from the USB drive, the altered environmental reports, the documentation of bribes, the plans showing the full scale of the proposed demolition. I placed them on the table without comment. My father's expression didn't change, but I noticed a slight tension in his jaw. "Amateur dramatics aren't necessary, Rebecca. We're all aware of the documentation you possess. Are you aware that I've made multiple copies? That secure versions exist with several trusted individuals, with instructions to release them to authorities and media if anything happens to me." I met each of their gazes in turn. "Are you aware that Grandma documented everything? Every meeting, every altered report, every payment to officials?" Richardson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately, Thomas." "No need," my father said, his voice hardening. "Rebecca understands that releasing that information would damage far more than just the people in this room. The economic impact on Cedar Grove would be substantial. Jobs lost, investments withdrawn, charitable funding dried up. Is that the legacy she wants? Don't presume to tell me what legacy I want, I replied evenly. I've spent the past few days learning a great deal about legacy, about what matters and what doesn't, about truth and its consequences. I withdrew a second folder containing the photographs Sarah had shared of Robert Cooper's architectural work throughout the historic district. I placed them before my father, watching his expression carefully. Do you recognize these carvings, these design elements? They're in buildings throughout downtown, the community center, the Heritage Hotel, the old courthouse. My father glanced at the photos with minimal interest. What's your point? They were created by Robert Cooper. The name clearly meant nothing to him. Should that matter to me? I took a deep breath, acutely aware of the others watching this exchange with growing confusion. It should. He was your biological father. The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at me, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and then a cold fury. What did you say? Robert Cooper was your biological father. Edward Everett knew. It was part of the arrangement when Grandma agreed to stay in the marriage. She met Robert before she married Edward. They were in love, but circumstances forced them apart. This is absurd, he snapped, but there was a hint of uncertainty beneath his anger. Another manipulation. It's the truth, I interrupted. Grandma documented everything. There's DNA confirmation. And these photographs? This is your father's legacy, his artistry, embedded in the very buildings you want to demolish. Richardson and Montgomery exchanged alarmed glances. This was clearly not information they had been privy to. Perhaps, Montgomery suggested carefully, we should give the family some privacy to discuss these personal matters. No, my father said sharply. This changes nothing about our business arrangements. These buildings are still structurally outdated and economically underperforming. Their demolition and replacement represents the best path forward for Cedar Grove's economic future. Even knowing they contain irreplaceable artistic elements created by your biological father? I challenged. Even knowing that destroying them erases part of your own heritage? I don't believe any of this, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. This is just another tactic. I reached into my bag one final time and removed the envelope Sarah had given me. I slid it across the table. These are letters Robert Cooper wrote to you throughout your life. Letters he never sent. There are also gifts he made for you. Birthday presents, graduation gifts, mementos for every milestone. He followed your life from a distance, never allowed to acknowledge you publicly, but never forgetting you were his son. My father stared at the envelope without touching it. Margaret told you all this? She left letters, journals, documentation. Sarah Cooper, Robert's sister, filled in the gaps. I leaned forward slightly. Dad, I'm not sharing this to hurt you or to win some negotiation. I'm sharing it because it's the truth, and because Grandma believed you deserved to know it eventually, when you were ready. Vanessa placed a hand on my father's arm, but he shook it off, his attention fixed on the envelope. With visible reluctance, he finally picked it up and opened it, withdrawing the top letter. The room remained silent as he read, his expression impossible to interpret. When he finally looked up, something had changed in his eyes. Not softening, exactly, but a newfound uncertainty that created tiny fissures in his usual armor of confidence. This proves nothing, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. There's DNA confirmation if you want it, I replied gently, but I think you already know it's true. Haven't you ever wondered why you have artistic talent that neither Edward nor Grandma possessed? Why you're left-handed when neither of them were? Why your coloring is different from the Everett family photos? He said nothing, but his gaze drifted back to the photographs of the wood carvings. I saw recognition dawn slowly, perhaps seeing something of himself in the artistic style, the attention to detail, the perfect balance of form and function. "The development project is still sound business," Richardson interjected, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground, perhaps with some modifications to preserve certain architectural elements. "The project is an environmental disaster waiting to happen," I countered, without taking my eyes off my father. "You know it, I know it, and thanks to Grandma's documentation, the EPA will know it too if you proceed." My father finally met my gaze directly. "What do you want, Rebecca? Really?" "I want the historic district protected. I want the community center to continue serving the children who need it. I want Everett Fine Furnishings to embrace sustainable practices and fair labor policies." I paused. "And I want you to have the chance to know who you really are. Not just the Everett heir, but Robert Cooper's son too. A man with artistic heritage and craftsmanship in his blood." For the first time in my adult life, I saw my father at a loss. The careful constructs of identity and purpose he'd built over decades were crumbling, leaving him unmoored. Vanessa watched him with barely concealed impatience, while Richardson and Montgomery clearly wished themselves elsewhere. "I need time," he finally said. "This is a lot to process." "Of course," I agreed. "But the development plans need to be withdrawn immediately, today. We can discuss everything else afterward." He hesitated, looking to his business partners, who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Thomas," Montgomery said carefully, "perhaps a strategic pause would be wise. Allow time to reevaluate certain aspects of the project." After a long moment, my father nodded. "Fine, we'll withdraw the current proposal, but this discussion isn't over." "I wouldn't expect it to be," I replied. "There's a lot more to talk about." As the meeting broke up, Richardson and Montgomery made hasty exits, leaving just my father, Vanessa, Watkins, and me in the conference room. Vanessa was furious, her perfect composure finally cracking. "This is ridiculous, Thomas. You can't possibly be considering abandoning the project based on some unverifiable claim about parentage and a few wood carvings." "Not now, Vanessa," my father said, his voice distant as he continued to study the photographs. "Yes, now," she insisted. "We're talking about millions in potential profit. Your mother clearly manipulated this entire situation, and Rebecca is leveraging it beautifully. I'll give her that. But you can't—" I said not now. There was a finality in his tone that silenced even Vanessa. "I need to verify some things. Alone." She stared at him incredulously before gathering her designer handbag and stalking out, heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. Watkins tactfully suggested he would wait for me in the lobby, leaving me alone with my father for the first time in 3 years. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "Was she happy?" he finally asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "With him?" "From what I've learned, yes," I answered honestly, "when they could be together. She loved him her whole life." He nodded slightly, collecting the letters and returning them to the envelope. "And these carvings? They're really his work?" "Yes, Sarah has documentation, photographs, his original sketches. Much of his best early work is in the buildings downtown. He was quite talented. And I never knew." There was a hollow quality to his voice that suggested the beginning of grief, not just for Robert Cooper, but for the relationship that never was, the truth kept hidden for so long. "There's more to learn if you want to," I offered. "His workshop is still intact. Sarah has maintained everything just as he left it. There are journals, photographs, finished pieces he made throughout his life, things he made specifically for you." My father's gaze lifted to meet mine, and for a moment, I glimpsed vulnerability beneath the carefully constructed persona of Thomas Everett, successful businessman. Why are you telling me this? After everything? It was a fair question. After years of estrangement, after his attempts to disinherit me and dismiss my life's work, why was I offering him a path to understanding rather than simply using the leverage I now possessed? Because Grandma believed in truth and reconciliation, in the end, I said simply, and because I think you deserve the chance to know who you really are. I gathered my things and moved toward the door. Call me when you're ready to talk about next steps, for the business, for the properties, for all of it. I'll be waiting. As I left, I saw him turn back to the photographs, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns carved by the father he had never known. 2 weeks later, the Cedar Grove Gazette ran a headline that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Historic district to be preserved. Everett Enterprises announces new restoration initiative. The accompanying photograph showed my father and me standing together outside the community center, a united front despite the obvious tension still visible in our postures. The article detailed plans not for demolition, but for careful restoration of key buildings in the historic district, with special emphasis on preserving the architectural elements now publicly attributed to Robert Cooper. A new foundation, the Cooper Everett Heritage Trust, would oversee the work and establish educational programs about traditional craftsmanship and sustainable building practices. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. My father and I still disagreed on fundamental values. The path forward for Everett Fine Furnishings remained under negotiation. The full truth about our family history was still making its way through Cedar Grove's social circles, generating both sympathy and scandal. But as I stood in Robert Cooper's workshop that evening, watching my father hesitantly handle the tools his biological father had used, I felt Grandma's presence somehow. Her relief that the secrets had finally been exposed, her hope that truth might eventually heal what deception had damaged. He made this for my college graduation, my father said quietly, holding a beautifully carved desk set. Never even met me, but he made this. He loved you from a distance, I replied. The way Grandma loved you up close, imperfectly, but completely. My father nodded, carefully returning the desk set to its place. We were far from reconciled, still finding our way through the complicated legacy we both had inherited. But the truth, painful as it had been, had created space for something new to grow, something built not on deception and appearance, but on the solid foundation of what was real and verifiable and authentic. In the end, that was the true inheritance, worth preserving. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.